a demo for you on dimensional applique. It's a really nice technique. It adds a lot of really nice detail to your quilts. It can, and it's fairly easy to do. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to switch the camera here and show you an example and start going through the steps. So let me find this thing. Here we go. Okay, so this is what dimensional applique looks like. As you can see, it sticks out from the quilt. It's not fused to the quilt. It's similar to fusible applique, but it's not fused to your background. And there's actually two ways you can do this. This one, these petals here, actually have batting in them. It makes them have a little bit more body, a little bit stiffer, and it holds its shape better so it doesn't flop when it's hanging up. So you can see there's some, it's sticking out a little bit, but it's not flopping over. So that's with batting. And then the leaves, there's no batting. It's just fabric to fabric. It's a little bit more floppy, but it works in this area right here because it's not something that needs to stand up. It's actually attached from the top, so it hangs real nice. Okay, so first I'm going to show you how to do the leaves, how to do the one that just has fabric. Okay, so I've got here I've drawn my template on my fusible web, and I forgot to mention you want to use a lightweight fusible web. You want something that's thin, that's not going to be real heavy. That's really important. What I use is the Pellon 805 Wonder Under. It's a nice lightweight interfacing, or fusible web, I'm sorry. Okay, so I've got this fusible on here. I'm going to peel the paper off and warm my iron up. So I'm going to fuse this to the back of another piece of fabric. Now on this particular thing, with dimensional applique, you generally want to use the same fabric on the back as the front. Because of the dimension, it's going to show a little bit. Okay, so I've got the same fabric here, and I'm going to fuse that on there. Now, depending on what fabric you use, you might not have enough contrast between this piece and this piece. It might actually end up kind of washed out. Look, and you can kind of see it there. Well, I've got a trick for that to show you how to see that edge better. So I'm going to fuse this on here. Trying to adjust the size of this screen here. So I'm fusing this on here. So there it is. It's on there. Okay, so now I'm going to show you that trick. Okay, so in order to see this edge to stitch it, you need to use some kind of writing utensil. I've got a pen here. You could use a crayon. If you're going to use something with color, you might want to use it to match the thread that you're going to use. So I'm using black thread today so that you can see it real well, but normally on something like this I would probably use a green thread. So I would use either a really fine tip utensil like this one where it won't show real bad after it's stitched. It shows just enough to show me where to stitch. So I'm just going to go along the edge of this and just put a line there so you can see what you're doing. So you can see the difference there. You can see that line real well. The other side it's a little bit harder. So okay, so when you go to stitch this, you use a zigzag stitch. If you use a zigzag for your regular fusible applique, you would do the same thing. However, if you do buttonhole stitching on your fusible applique, you cannot use it for this technique. So I've got my machine set here, a 2 width and a 0.5 length for my zigzag stitch. Okay, so there are two things I want to show you. One is how to do an outside corner and how to do an inside corner. And this is very similar to regular fusible applique. So I'm just going to show you with the pencil first and then I'll stitch it. So you're going to start, this is your fabric over here, the top fabric. So I'm going to start and I'm going to zigzag like this. Then when I get down to the corner, I'm going to put my needle in and stop right at the corner, lift the presser foot, and then pivot. And then I'm going to stitch, and when I first start stitching, I want to stitch in those stitches so that it doesn't get cut off when I go to trim this. So then I'm going to stitch and go down the edge. And that's how you do an outside corner. Okay, an inside corner is a little bit trickier. So here's your fabric. That's your fabric there, your top layer. So you're going to zigzag stitch like this. And you're going to go down and get down to the corner. Now you're going to move the needle over to this side of the stitch and pivot. So that's very important. When you're doing the outside corner, the needle's on the outside of the corner when you pivot. When you're doing an inside corner, the needle's on the inside before you pivot. So now I've got my needle down and I'm going to pivot. I am not going to pivot all the way. I'm going to stitch back in that corner, stitch again. Get that out of the way. Okay, pivot, stitch back in that crease, stitch back out here, pivot. And you're going to do this several times, and what you're doing is you're landing in this spot several times. Stitch back out here, pivot, stitch back in that crevice, stitch back out here, and then now you can just keep going sewing. Okay, so you're going to have a little bit of build up here, but that's what's going to make it look good. So let me show you on the machine. Let me get this so it stays on the needle. I'm trying to get the focus here. So I'm coming up to a corner. Now the one I just showed you on the paper is a 90-degree angle. This one's not, it's less than that, so it's going to be slightly different, but it's the same idea. So I'm going to stitch down here. Now it's an outside corner, so I'm going to hand crank this and manipulate it just a little bit and then pivot and do like one stitch that's kind of in between the two sides. Go back to that corner. Now I'm going to pivot again, and because it's not a 90-degree, I don't turn it all the way. Now do you see how I'm going down in the stitches and then back to the side? Pivot a little bit more, and then I'm going to start stitching down the side. I'm just cruising along here, a nice straight edge, so I don't have to really do too much. When you get to your curve, I like to think of an invisible line that's going straight out from the needle. So when I see my fabric start to curve away from the needle, I know it's time to pivot. So if you're curving, if your curve goes, if it's an outside curve, you're going to pivot on the outside. If it's an inside curve, you're going to pivot on the inside. So I'm going to pivot this just a little bit. Now sometimes you can actually, if it's a real slight curve, you can hang on to this side and the machine will pull this through, and then it'll actually kind of curve on its own. So if it's a real slight curve, you can do that. And that's kind of what I'm doing right here. So it's a combination of two. So I'm going to pivot just a little, adjust it. You have to adjust it quite a bit. That's just part of applique. Pivot a little bit more. A little bit more. And I am using, I think I mentioned, I'm using black thread so you can see exactly what I'm doing, but I wouldn't normally use that color thread. I like to have my threads blend with my fabrics because then it hides all your mistakes and nobody knows. And it looks fantastic. And I'm going to keep going till I get to that inside corner and show you the inside corner on the machine. So just cruising along here. Okay, we're getting up to that inside corner. And you'll see what I mean about, so I'm right in that crevice there. So now I'm going to go hand crank it. Now you can either hand crank and go real slow, or you can just use your pedal. I like to, sometimes I do one, sometimes I do the other. So I'm going right in that same spot, hand crank another stitch, pivot. And you're going to do this gradually until when you pivot, it kind of looks like you're going a straight line along the edge. I think one more will do it. And so now I'm ready to keep on stitching. And of course, now I get right to an outside curve, so I'm going to start pivoting that way again. So I'm almost done with this, so I'm going to go ahead and finish this up and show you what to do. I forgot to mention, you want to leave thread tails when you start and stop your stitching. I've got a nice little way for you to take care of those thread tails so that it looks really tidy. So almost done here. Just a little bit farther. And I end up, when I get close to the end of where I'm going to meet up with the beginning of the stitching, I like to slow way down and try and match it up as best as I can. And I'll even hand crank it a couple times to try and meet up those stitches without crossing over. Okay, so that's done. So now I'm going to take this out of the machine. Got my long thread tails here. So now I'm going to pull those thread tails to the back. I'm going to pull it up so they're all on the back. Okay, so now how do you take care of those? Very simple. I'm going to take one set of thread tails. I'm going to trim them. Put them on a hand sewing needle. I like to use a needle that's, I think this is an embroidery size 9, but it's a slender needle with a larger eye, so it's easier to work with. So I've got my thread tails in there. So now I'm going to take this needle and I'm going to slip under these stitches on the back. Slip under several stitches and then just pull it right through. Trim off the excess. And now it's invisible. So I'm going to do the other thread tails, same way I just did the first one. If it will cooperate. There we go. Okay, now I'm actually going to go the opposite direction I did of the other one. I went this way with the other one, and just to avoid dealing with bulk, I'm going to go the other direction. So, sliding this under the threads, under the stitches. Okay, under several stitches there. And pull through. Trim off the excess. And look how nice and neat that is. Nobody's going to ever know where you started and stopped your stitching. So now I'm going to show you how to add some detail to your applique. So I have here a chalk marker, and I'm going to draw some veins on here. So I'm going to just freehand this and just draw a line. Draw some veins on there. This is so simple to do. It really, really is. And it just adds such nice detail. And if you don't stay right on the line, nobody will know because it'll come off. Okay, so now I'm going to stop using the zigzag and go to a straight stitch. I'm going to slowly bring my needle down so I know I'm right where I want to be, and then start stitching. Sorry about that. So I'm going to just stitch down this line. And again, you want to leave some thread tails, a good length of thread tails on each of these, because you're going to do the same thing that I showed you just a minute ago, where you took the thread tails and put them under the stitching. Okay, so now let's do a couple veins here. Same kind of thing. Bring the needle down manually so I know it's where I want it, and then start stitching. Now on this one, I get where I want. I'm going to pivot, take another stitch, and pivot some more, and just follow the line as much as I want to. So, and I just keep doing that until I have all the veins done. So it's really simple to do. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'll just show you one time. Bring these thread tails up. Okay, so I've got my thread tails. Now, if you're in a spot on your applique where, now with the fabric to fabric, you're going to have to get your threads either along the stitching, or I'll show you on the sample I have. One thing you can do if you can't get next to the edge, you can also weave the threads back through the stitches underneath. So I just took a needle and put the thread tails on there, and then just weaved right through the stitches like that. If you can get under these stitches, it's better, but if you're in a spot where you're adding detail and you can't get to that, that's the other option. Okay, so now I'm going to put this aside. So here's one I have that's all done. So now I'm going to show you how to cut. Now what I have found is that my bigger scissors work better for cutting than my little scissors. And I think the reason is because the bigger scissors are fatter and they don't get as close to the stitches, so they don't nick the stitches. So what you want to do is you want to get as close to the stitches as you can and trim away the excess, and obviously try not to nick the stitches. Now, if you nick the stitches, don't panic. There are a couple remedies for that. One is fray check. If you nick the stitches somewhere, just put a dab of fray check and it'll be fine. Another way to do it is with a glue stick, regular old school glue stick. You just take it and you just rub it on there wherever you nick the stitches and it'll stay in place. I personally like the glue stick better, but you can use either one. Okay, so now I'm going to keep trimming here, and you just carefully go around the whole thing. This is where you want to take a little time. Be careful. And you just keep going until it's done. Okay, and I will not take the time to cut the whole thing out, but you get the idea. Now, if you've got spots on your edge that you aren't happy with, let's say the stitching just was kind of sloppy, like right here, I wasn't really up to the edge. Because I use black thread, I have a black Pigma pen. I'm just going to take and color that in a little bit. And ta-da! Looks tons better. Down here at the bottom, it looks like it wasn't very neat down there. So I'm just going to fill that in with a Pigma pen. And nobody knows. Isn't that awesome? Alright, so that's the leaf. Now, how do you attach that to the quilt? So this leaf, all I did is position it where I want. I use some painter's tape. You just take a piece of painter's tape and you hold down your applique where you want it. And then I stitched from here to here. That's all I did, is I stitched that bit right there. Pull the thread tails to the back and bury the thread tails, so that when you're done stitching, it hangs loose, but it's attached. Isn't that cool? That is just so cool. All right, so now that's the fabric to fabric applique. Now you can use that for more than just leaves, and I'm just gonna whip around here and show you. Here's a quilt I did. These flowers, just fabric to fabric. Now because these are so small, they don't flop over. They have a nice looseness to them, but they don't flop over. And I've got buttons to secure them to the background. So that's the kind of thing you can do with that. Here's a vine. I did the same thing with those leaves. I didn't put as many veins, but I attached them the same way. It's fabric to fabric. That's all that is. Okay, so now let's talk about the petals. The one that has the batting in it. So here I have a square batting. I have a butterfly. It's got fusible on the back. I've got batting. I also have a square of fabric here. This has fusible on the back. So I'm going to peel that off. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fuse the back to the batting. Now, I'm going to take a piece of parchment paper. This stuff is fantastic. It's just regular parchment paper that you would buy at the grocery store. It's used for baking, but you can use it for this too. I've got a strip here. I'm going to fold it in half. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the batting with the backing on there, And I'm going to put it in the parchment paper so I don't get any junk in my iron and I don't get any junk on my ironing surface. Okay, so now I'm going to fuse this down really good. And you want to make sure, I think it's like 10 to 12 seconds that you want to do this. Okay, open it up, and there we go. We've got our backing fused to our batting. So now I'm going to take my butterfly and I'm going to peel the paper off that. I've already got the fusible on there. I'm going to lay that on my square here on the batting side. I'm going to take my parchment paper, same situation here, put that in there, cover it up, and then fuse it in place for a good 10 to 12 seconds. And there it is. So now you would take it to the machine and do your stitching. Now it's the same technique as the leaf, so I'm not going to take you through all that. And you can see this curled up a little bit. That's actually cool for the butterfly, but it's once you stitch everything, it's going to lay better. So I've got one that's already stitched, and I'll show you that. So here's one that's already stitched. It's almost finished cutting out. I'm just going to show you that a little bit. You want to do all this stitching before you trim away. If you try and do it after you trim, you'll have an awful time trying to hold on to this thing and having control of it. So you're going to go around the edges just like we did before with the leaf. Go ahead. I changed to straight stitch and did some straight stitching just to add some detail. And then what I did for the body of the butterfly is I just did 2 straight lines of stitching, and then I took my Pigma pen and colored it in. Can't get much easier than that. Okay, so we'll finish cutting this apart, and then I'll talk to you about the edges on this. This is a little bit different than the fabric to fabric. And if you notice, you can see a little bit of that batting peeking out. And I'm going to show you how to take care of that. So just carefully cut around there. And again, if you make a mistake, it's okay. Use the fray check or the glue stick. No problem. So now we have this edge where you can see the batting. What do you do about that? You take a crayon that's the same size, same color as your thread. And all you're going to do is rub that on there. And it will cover, it will disguise that so you don't see it. And you just keep doing that until, so you can see the difference there. You can see the part that's colored and the part that's not. Isn't that cool? So you just keep doing that until you got your edge the way you want it. And as soon as I finish this, I'm going to show you how to attach it to your background, to your quilt. So, and actually, I did want to show you, here's an example of how to bury the stitches with the one with batting. Is actually a little bit easier if you're not near the edges. Like you can see here, you're going to take your needle and you're going to slide it in there, and it's actually going to go in the batting. So you can see that you can't see the needle here. You can't see the needle here. So I'm going to slide through pull my threads through, cut off the excess. Ta-da! Nobody knows. Okay, so now to attach this to the quilt, I'm going to bring the quilt over here. So let's say I want to attach it right here. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch down each side of the body so that it's only attached like that, and then the wings can come up. Isn't that cool? So I'm going to do that real quick here. And then you're going to do the same thing that we've already done as far as the thread tails. You're going to make sure you have thread tails. You're going to bury those thread tails, pull them to the back and bury them. Okay, so I'm just going to do a straight stitch here, right along the body of the butterfly. Take that out, cut the threads, do the other side. Take it out. Uh-oh, looks like I ran out of bobbin thread. Well, that was close. So you can still see the whole idea. Huh, look at that. I won bobbin roulette. Woohoo! Sorry. Okay, so again, we'd pull the thread tails to the back, bury those thread tails, but look at that. Isn't that beautiful? So here we go. Here's our butterfly. You can see the dimension. Pretend the thread tails aren't there. But it sticks out, and it's a lovely detail. You got the petals, you got the leaves. Now let me talk to you just for a minute about these petals. If you wanted to do something like this, how would you attach something like this? Each of these petals is individual. It's an individual piece, okay? So I arrange them the way I want. I use the painter's tape again. And then I took a piece, it's just cut a circle that has fusible on the back and applique that down and then stitch around the edge, and that's how it holds those petals in place. And then I embellished it with some pearl beads. So that's it. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you give it a try.